Welcome, everyone. This is Renewable Energy Markets 101. My name is Noah Bucon. I'm a senior analyst at Center for Resource Solutions. I'm joined today by Chris Kent from the US EPA and Eric O'Shaughnessy from NREL. So this is an introductory session covering the voluntary markets for renewable energy. I'll be starting off with a fundamental overview of basically how the markets work. From there, Eric O'Shaughnessy will take over and he'll discuss different procurement options and also discuss market trends. And then Chris Kent will finish up with a deep dive into renewable energy consumption claims and best practices for those claims. So just quickly, a couple things before we get into the content. All of attendees are muted by default. We'll plan to present for about 45 minutes, and hopefully we'll leave some time for questions at the end. If you do have questions, like I said, we'll get to those at the end. Please log them in the toolbar on the right-hand side of your screen. From there, I guess I will jump into the content. But before I do, I also want to let you know that we're recording this webinar, and then later this week, we will send out both a link to the video recording as well as a link to our slide deck. So in case you're not familiar with us, CRS is a 501c3 nonprofit based in San Francisco, California. Since 1997, we've been providing policy and market solutions to advance sustainable energy. And so this includes expert assistance related to technical and policy related issues in renewable energy and carbon markets. We also host a number of conferences, workshops, and webinars like this one. But most notably, we have an annual Renewable Energy Markets Conference. And the next one is in Houston this coming October. Finally, CRS also administers the Greenie certification program for suppliers and buyers of renewable energy and carbon offsets sold in the voluntary market. So I'll start off pretty basic, and then we'll layer in complexity from here. Just so we're on the same page, when we talk about renewable resources, we're talking about solar, wind, geothermal, biomass, and hydroelectric power. And so when we talk about the size and capacity of these different types of facilities, we talk about, we refer to these in terms of kilowatts and megawatts. And then when we actually refer to the output of these facilities, we quantify that with what we call usually kilowatt hours or megawatt hours. So for example, a megawatt hour is the amount of electricity produced by 1 megawatt of capacity over the course of an hour of generation. And so just to put this in context, last year in the United States, utility scale facilities generated over 4 billion megawatt hours of electricity. As you can see in this chart, the vast majority is still dominated by fossil fuels, with nuclear at 20% and renewables are still only at 17%. So despite all of the progress we've had over the last several years, the last decade, we still have quite a ways to go in terms of expanding the impact of renewables on the grid. And so of all these resource types that we saw on that original slide, these are all injected into shared electrical grids. And we don't have necessarily one big grid that spans the whole country. We have all of these different regional grids. And these regional shared electrical grids are coordinated by what we call regional transmission organizations and independent system operators. And essentially what these entities do is they're coordinating supply in the wholesale markets to ensure an equilibrium with demand. And so when I say wholesale markets, I'm referring to the markets that exist between electricity generators and the suppliers of electricity that are delivering that electricity to the end users. And then those markets between the end users, the consumers of electricity, the markets between them and those electricity suppliers are referred to as retail markets. So as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, a lot of these end users want to make claims to be specifically purchasing renewable energy. And that can be a bit complicated because once these resources are injected into the grid, those electrons become indifferentiable. An electron from a coal-fired power plant is identical to an electron from a solar photovoltaic facility. And so it's for that reason that we use renewable energy certificates, and then we refer to them as RECs. And RECs represent the environmental attributes of renewable energy generation. And so when I say environmental attributes, you can think of avoided emissions, reduced pollution, less greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, generally that type of thing. And so one REC is equal to the attributes of 1 megawatt hour of renewable generation. So generally, RECs are used to allocate and claim the use of renewable generation on a shared grid. So you can think of them as an accounting mechanism that prevents double counting and then double claiming in the market. And so this adds a lot of accountability to what would otherwise be a somewhat nebulous market of environmental attributes, but it also has the added benefit of creating a national market for renewable energy. So it increases flexibility, and it allows individuals to actually purchase these attributes across geographic boundaries. And so it's not uncommon for the REC to be permanently bundled with the electricity, although sometimes the environmental attributes are actually unbundled or disaggregated from the electricity. And the megawatt hours of electricity are sold to one entity and the RECs are sold to another. And so in this case, when the RECs have been sold elsewhere, that power has actually lost the environmental attributes associated with renewable energy. And we refer to this as null power. So null power has the attributes of the residual mix after specified power purchases have been removed. And so in our office, we joke that null power claims are reckless. So if you're an energy nerd, maybe you find that funny. If not, I'll just move on to the next slide. Basically, to account for this market, we use REC tracking systems, which are these databases that are used to track, trade, and retire RECs. And so this is important because any genuine renewable energy claim has to be substantiated with a retired or canceled REC. And this is because if you don't actually retire a REC within one of these tracking systems, that REC can then easily be sold to another entity, and that entity can then claim the attributes that you believe you're entitled to. And one thing that's important to mention is that these systems are used both in the voluntary market, which is the focus of the webinar that we are giving today, and they're also used in the compliance markets. And so when I talk about the compliance market, I'm referring mostly to renewable portfolio standards. So you can see here in this figure, a graph of the US, that there are an incredible number of RPS policies around the country. And basically what these do is they mandate that electricity service providers in different states deliver a certain percentage of renewable energy to ratepayers. And so in order to comply with these regulations, these electricity service providers are actually retiring RECs in the same tracking systems. And so it's important to note that when a REC is retired for use for compliance with a state policy like this, it's important that it's not also retired in terms of the voluntary market. So the idea here is that we have the voluntary market pushing demand for renewable energy in a way that's kind of separate to and incremental to what would occur under these regulations. And so this allows a voluntary purchaser of renewable energy to have a credible impact of their purchase above and beyond what would otherwise occur through the existing regulations. And then that's important for preserving demand within the voluntary market. And so at the beginning of my segment, I mentioned Greenie certification. It's the program that CRS administers. One of the key benefits of certification is that we'll ensure that when a voluntary purchaser purchases a certified product, they're guaranteed to be receiving all of those attributes associated with those megawatt hours of renewable energy. So we make sure that those voluntary megawatt hours aren't being counted in compliance markets, and that they're not being double sold into other voluntary markets, or they're not being claimed by other third parties in the energy market. And so, we think this is really valuable to consumer protection, and we believe it adds a lot of legitimacy to this market. And so in 2016, which was the last reporting year, We certified 48 million megawatt hours of renewable energy, which is equivalent to about 1.3% of the total US supply. And that was delivered to just under about 1 million purchasers. So later in April, we'll have a webinar that digs deeper into the nuts and bolts of green certification. But for now, I will turn it over to Eric O'Shaughnessy at NRL to talk more about different ways you can purchase green power and also what some of the key market trends are.
Thanks, Noah. Yeah, so my name is Eric. I work at the National Renewable Energy Lab. We compile annual data on what we call voluntary green power markets. So the point of my segment is to talk about what those markets are, how customers can actually buy green power. Next slide. So the first thing to do is talk about what we mean by voluntary green power. The definition here, the key words are voluntarily purchased by retail electricity customers. So voluntarily meaning outside of a state RPS, which Noah talked about, and retail just meaning non-utility, so by non-utility customers. And I'm going to go through 7 different green power products or markets. And I think the key thing in a 101 session, the key takeaway is that behind all of these products are RECs. So just really grasp that concept that all of these products are RECs, even though there's going to be one that seems to be more connected to RECs than others. Every single renewable energy purchase must be backed by a REC. Next slide. I think this is just a big picture looking at the size of the market and some trends. So in 2016, we estimate about 6 million customers bought around 95 million megawatt hours of renewable energy through voluntary green power markets. Stable growth from 2010 to 2016 with roughly a 20% increase in 2015 and 2016. So the markets are doing well. The voluntary green power market represents about 2.5% of all US retail electricity sales, or about 28% of all US non-hydro renewable energy generation. Next slide. You can advance one more. So now I'm going to go through some of the ways that customers can actually buy green power. The first is kind of the classic green power program. It's called utility green pricing. Most customers in regulated utility service territories can likely buy green power through their utility. In this case, the utility buys and retires RECs on behalf of their customers and then charges their customers through an additional line item on their bill. This is a particularly attractive product, primarily for residential and small commercial customers. It's very easy to engage with, very low transaction costs. Many customers are probably eligible for these types of programs without even knowing it. Next slide. Utility renewable contracts. This is like a green pricing program. The key difference is that these are primarily for larger customers, so larger commercial customers. And this is a way for those customers to buy renewable energy from a specific project. So in a green pricing program, typically they may offer, say, wind, but it's not always clear where the wind is coming from. In this case, a large customer might want to say, we want to buy wind from that specific project. And this is done through a utility renewable contract. A specific type of this contract is a green tariff, which is available in several utility service territories. These are programs open to all customers, all commercial customers. Next slide. And I guess I should mention, I'll be burning through a lot of these, but we'll link to resources, and there's obviously plenty of information out there, so hopefully no one's scrambling too much to take notes too quickly. So now moving into restructured electricity markets. For those of you who live in those markets, you're well aware that you buy electricity from a competitive supplier rather than a regulated utility. Very similar to utility green pricing program, many competitive suppliers will offer to buy and retire RECs on behalf of their customers and charge their customers through an additional line item. Again, this is primarily for residential and small commercial customers. Next slide. Unbundled RECs. So Noah talked about this concept of unbundling. In this little figure, you can imagine that's null power going to the right. That might be going into, say, a wholesale market. And then the RECs are split off and sold to the customer. And the key thing here is that the customer that has the RECs has the right to make the renewable energy claim. It does not matter where the actual power goes to. It's the REC owner that has all the rights to the clean energy attributes of the generation. And as I'll get into in a bit, unbundled RECs are by far the largest source of green power in the United States, and primarily for large commercial customers. Next slide. Community choice aggregation is an interesting, relatively new product where a community entity aggregates many residential and small commercial meters and then procures green power on behalf of those meters. And an interesting thing about community choice aggregation, or CCAs, is that these are opt-out programs. So the community entity will automatically enroll their customers into a green power product. And then most customers probably don't realize the change happened or need to take action to opt out of the program if they choose. Because of this opt-out component, these have been highly effective products at selling green power products to residential customers, as I'll elaborate on further. Next slide. Power purchase agreements. I think many people have probably heard of power purchase agreements, or PPAs. In this case, typically a commercial customer signs a long-term contract to procure power from a generator. And it becomes a green power PPA if the PPA contract includes RECs. So again, it's very common, and you might see in the news that certain customers sign PPAs for specific projects, but those customers do not own the right to claim renewable energy use unless their contract includes the RECs. So that's a very important piece, as I mentioned earlier. And there are many different types of PPAs. This is a complex product. There are virtual and physical PPAs. Those might be good questions for the Q&A, and then plenty of research to do. Next slide. And I think this is the last one, community solar. This is where a central solar PV array is used to generate energy on behalf of multiple customers or subscribers. The subscribers pay for a given capacity output from the shared or community solar array. And the caveat here, again, is those customers must own the RECs in order to make a claim to be using solar. In the vast majority of cases of community solar projects, customers do not own the RECs. So in that case, the customers are just buying null power. They probably enjoy some lower electricity bills, but the customers cannot or do not own the right to claim to be using solar. There are a handful of projects that have emerged that do convey the RECs to their customers or subscribers. Next slide. So now we've gone through all these, it's time to put them into context. On the left in this slide are sales. So those are megawatt hours. And on the right are number of customers. So beginning on the left, as I mentioned, unbundled RECs, about half of all sales and steadily increasing. But if you look on the right, unbundled RECs, the navy bar in the middle barely shows up. So on the left, sales are really driven by large commercial customers. For instance, you see PPAs on the left because many corporations are signing very large PPAs, but PPAs don't even show up in terms of number of customers because there are very few projects, but those projects are very large. Similarly for unbundled RECs, not that many customers buy unbundled RECs, but when they do, they tend to buy very large purchases. In contrast, on the right, you see the number of customers are really dominated by CCAs, competitive suppliers, and utility green pricing programs, exactly because those programs comprise many residential customers rather than a few large commercial customers. So that's another thing to take away from this is that sales, the megawatt hours, are driven by large customers, but the markets actually are primarily residential customers in terms of number of customers. Next slide. And now just to think about the geography of green power, this all depends on what types of products are available in local areas. Customers can buy some products like unbundled RECs everywhere. Every single electricity customer in the United States can buy green power through unbundled RECs. Some other products are a bit more location specific. So this map just shows by state what are the most common ways that customers buy green power. So we see that utility green pricing is really the primary mechanism, precisely because many states are still regulated utility states. A handful of states, we see CCAs, the dark blue. Those are states that have passed legislation allowing community choice aggregation. A few states, primarily by competitive suppliers and restructured markets like Texas, then a handful of states that are primarily in terms of unbundled RECs. So just another key takeaway that the green power, the choices, the types of products that are made depend on things like local legislation and the regulated status of utilities. Next slide. And I think this is just, so this is the reference. This will, for everything I just burned through there, you can go here and it has much more information describing the different products, and it has a lot more data and everything that I just went through now. So with that, I will transfer it to Chris.
Thanks, Eric. I'm Christopher Kent. I'm with EPA's Green Power Partnership Program, and today I'm going to briefly do a quick overview of the Green Power Partnership Program and then focus really on the role that renewable energy certificates play in being able to make environmental claims. And then finally, I'm going to manage the short series of claim scenarios for you all to think about. We actually wanted to do this as an interactive session, but I couldn't boil down these questions to tweet-like pithy questions, so we're just going to do it the old school. So play along at home. Next slide, please. So the EPA's Green Power Partnership Program is a voluntary program that encourages organizations with US-based facilities to use electricity generated from renewable resources, and the program helps to promote that organizational use of green power leadership. It was begun in 2001 and it was designed to help spur new renewable energy supplies as well as expand existing renewable energy supplies in the US through a market-based approach of encouraging organizations to purchase ever-increasing amounts of renewable electricity. Our team helps organizations understand the process of purchasing green power as well as understanding the best practices throughout that whole process. The partnership provides a variety of tools and resources for partners to use in purchasing and communicating the environmental benefits of their green power use. These include our website. We also do a series of webinars. But our biggest driver for engagement in our program is our quarterly top partner lists. We currently have over 1,700 partners ranging from Fortune 500s to small privately owned and operated businesses. It's almost easier to say who can't join the program than who does. Essentially, our program doesn't include individual residences or energy retailers and suppliers. To join, our partners must meet a minimum of green energy usage requirements and then update us annually on their green power usage. Our 1,700 partners purchase more than 45 billion kilowatts of green power annually and represents about 50% of the voluntary green power market. Next slide. So as Eric and Noah had already talked about, but can't stress it enough, we're going to talk about what RECs are. They are the legal instrument used in the renewable energy markets to account for renewable energy electricity and its attributes, whether that renewable energy is installed on that organization's facility or purchased elsewhere. They are the currency for both the compliance and the voluntary renewable energy markets, and it represents a specific amount of electricity produced and generated to the grid by a renewable energy resource, and that demonstrates the generation of 1 megawatt hour of renewable energy. As Eric noted, all green power products involve RECs, from your on-site systems to utility supplied green power products to nationally sourced unbundled RECs. The owner of the REC has exclusive rights to make environmental attributes from that 1 megawatt of hour of renewable electricity and can make unique usage claims associated with that renewable electricity. The purchase and use of renewable energy verified with RECs is a decision an organization makes to ensure that its electricity is provided by a renewable resource and that produces a low or zero emissions, and thereby reducing the organization's market-based scope 2 emissions. RECs legally convey the attributes of the renewable energy generation, including the emissions profile of that generation, and as such, the renewable energy certificate owner has exclusive rights to characterize the quantity of their purchased electricity associated with those RECs from that zero emissions electricity. Organizations working to reduce their emissions footprint have a variety of options available to them, including RECs and offsets, but they are really two very different things, two different instruments used for different purposes with different effects. I always like to think of offsets and RECs as two tools to have in your sustainability toolbox, like a hammer and a saw. They're not interchangeable. Each tool is used to build a house, but each one is used to accomplish very specific tasks. One is not more important or better than the other, and you wouldn't use a hammer when you need a saw, and vice versa. So next, please. Because the physical electricity we receive through the grid says nothing of its origin or how it was generated, RECs play that important role of accounting, tracking, and assigning ownership to the renewable electricity generation and use. On a shared grid, whether it's an on-site or off-site resource, RECs are the instrument that electricity consumers must use to substantiate renewable energy use claims. RECs are a tool used to document and account an organization's efforts towards meeting their corporate greenhouse gas reporting and inventory goals, as well as state policy mandates under RPSs. REC procurement reduces the available REC supply, thereby sending an indirect signal to the market to develop more supply and can incent new renewable energy project development. For some organizations, being able to claim you're using renewable electricity and having an indirect impact on new project development isn't enough. So in order to have a direct impact on new project development, and in order to claim to be using renewable electricity and having a direct impact, an organization must play a much more significant role in that project's viability rather than just buying available green power supply options. Next, please. One reason organizations buy green power is so that they can make an environmental claim of using green power. Since an organization's purchase electricity is usually their greatest source of air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions, by purchasing green power, it can help improve that organization's environmental profile while also providing other valuable benefits. Our program has a lot of information on its website that outlines some of the factors that you should be looking at when making environmental claims. This website here, located on the bottom of the page, goes into in much greater depth about the best practices for appropriately explaining and characterizing your solar power use activities. It also goes into great detail about the importance that RECs play in being able to make solar power use claims. While the guidance is primarily focused on on-site projects, it's equally relevant for off-site owned projects. So when in doubt, check that out. Next slide, please. There's two basic types of claims associated with green power usage. Its generation and its use. For the purchaser or user, assuming that they've retained those RECs, which again convey the full rights of the environmental benefits from that generation source, they can claim that, as listed here, that their organization is powered by renewable electricity, that they're reducing greenhouse gas emissions from their scope 2 emissions, and that they're supporting the production of renewable energy. Buyers of bundled green power products and unbundled RECs should ensure that their supplier is not also applying those underlying attributes and benefits to a state mandate or such. Such a situation would essentially constitute a double claim between you and your supplier. On-site generators or off-site PPAs can make the claim that they've generated renewable electricity and have produced zero or low emissions electricity. Next slide, please. We're going to go into some examples of claims, and these come directly from the Federal Trade Commission's Green Guides. So in this example, a toy manufacturer has solar panels on its roof of its plant, and it advertises that the plant is 100% solar powered. However, the manufacturer has sold the RECs from this project, maybe to make it financially feasible. By selling these RECs into either the compliance or voluntary markets, they have transferred or sold off their rights to characterize the electricity they use as renewable. The toy plant is just using the same energy mix from the utility as anyone else. It's the null power. Thereby, they are making a deceptive claim to be using renewable energy. It may be unintentional, but it's still deceptive. Next slide, please. So using that same scenario, this same toy manufacturer should avoid making implied claims that consumers or stakeholders or the general public might interpret as the factory is using solar. As the Federal Trade Commission notes in this example of the manufacturer with the solar on its facility rooftop, even if the manufacturer uses the electricity generated by the solar panels, it has, by selling the renewable energy certificates, transferred the right to characterize that electricity as renewable. And then it goes on to say, it would be deceptive to advertise that it hosts a renewable energy facility because a reasonable consumer would likely interpret this claim to mean that the manufacturer uses renewable energy. Instead, if you intend to make a public statement about the project you're involved in, make sure it's clear to the reasonable consumer of what is really happening. Next slide. So in this example, a university issues a press release about its recent power purchase agreement for an on-campus 1 megawatt solar array. In the press release, they highlight their goal for achieving carbon neutrality by such and such date. And in the press release, they also note that the university has recently signed a power purchase agreement to get a fixed price electricity from an on-campus solar array. However, in this case, they didn't keep the RECs along with the reduced electricity prices. So while both claims may be technically accurate, by combining the two in the same press release or in the same breath, a reasonable reader of that release would interpret that the university is using solar from its project to reduce carbon footprint, when in fact it's not. Next slide, please. So when in doubt, you need to follow the money, and it's usually through contracts. Best practices include reviewing contracts, looking at the interconnection and net metering agreements, state and utility incentives, and other solar contracts associated with the project that you're engaged with. If your renewable energy system was installed via PPA or a solar lease, you should review that contract and verify that your organization owns the environmental attributes or RECs if it wishes to make claims about using renewable energy. RECs can be delivered and retired on your behalf contractually in a lease or a power purchase agreement. If the system is registered in the REC tracking system, the RECs will be issued to the project owner's account, and then either the project owner transfers the RECs to your account or can be retired on your behalf. Not surprising, contracts for RECs are not always the clearest documents in respect to REC ownership and how and when the retirement occurs. So you should really confirm your understanding what is happening in the RECs in any transaction to ensure that you are getting exclusive ownership to those RECs. When looking at these documents, they may not spell out renewable energy certificates. They may use similar terms like renewable energy credits, environmental attributes, green tags, or something like that. The Solar Energy Industries Association, SEIA, is a national trade association in the U.S. that represents all organizations that promote, manufacture, install, and support the development of solar energy. They work with thousands of member companies, and in their business codes, in their guiding principles, they've laid out that installers must educate their clients about RECs and give them a handout created by CRS, in fact, that talks about REC ownership and consumer and electricity guidelines. Next slide, please. So this is an example of a power purchase agreement. This section of the contract is entitled Environmental Attributes. In the top, it sort of, in that first box, it sort of defines that the ownership of the RECs goes to the seller. In the next box down, it sort of talks about claims, and it notes that the purchaser should check with the seller to see that what sort of claims that they can make based on this type of contract. You go a little further down, it defines the terms of the environmental attributes, and then finally it clarifies the various terms. And so as you can see, it's not the most clear way of determining who owns what, but it's usually in your contract, so check them out. Next, please. So without REC ownership, making claims about using renewable energy can result in a number of risks to your organization, as well as, it can violate state and federal law and guidances. Such risks include legal risks, possibly scrutiny by the Federal Trade Commission or your state attorney general's office for making false or deceptive marketing claims. It may be contractual or financial risks. There's a potential for breach of contract by conveying the same environmental attributes to multiple users. There's certainly a brand or reputation risk by making a deceptive claim. It might require you, the purchaser, to issue a clarifying statement regarding the actual claims of a renewable energy project, which is sort of damning. The organization that claims to be using solar power but doesn't own the RECs associated with their renewable energy will result in double counting and double claims against that renewable energy attribute. And double counting RECs between multiple parties really undermines the renewable energy market by overestimating the amount of renewable energy generated and used relative to the megawatt hours produced. So lots of problems there. Next slide, please. So there's a lot of resources out there to help you understand claims best practices. When in doubt, you can ask an industry expert or key stakeholders to review your communications and marketing material to ensure that they are accurate and adhere to industry standards. Experts include individuals from EPA's Green Power Partnership, CRS, and such as a third-party certification, CRS, regional and national solar power groups, renewable energy tracking systems, your legal counsel, renewable energy project developers. So, in summary, all renewable energy generation involves the generation of RECs, from on-site projects to utility projects, but only the ultimate owner of the renewable energy certificate can claim the environmental attributes of a particular megawatt hour of renewable energy. So if you're making claims about using renewable electricity, make sure you own and retire the RECs. If you don't own the RECs, don't make claims. So that's my spiel, and we're going to go into the workshop. So what we're going to do is I'm going to sort of read through the scenarios. You can sort of read through some of the answers that apply, and then we're going to sort of walk through them all. So this first scenario, company A has an on-site solar system, and they've retained their associated RECs. What sort of claims can this company make about their use and generation of renewable energy and the associated greenhouse gas emissions? Next slide. So based on the scenario of having an on-site system and owning the RECs, they can make claims about using solar power, that they're reducing their carbon footprint, and that they can apply a zero emissions rate to their scope 2 emissions. Let's try another scenario. So in this case, company B has an on-site solar system, but has not retained the associated RECs. What sort of claims can this company make about their use and generation of renewable energy and the associated greenhouse gas emissions claims? As you can imagine, this would have been much more interactive if you could actually have selected these. Okay, next. So in this case, since they didn't retain the RECs, they can't be making that claim that they're using solar power. But they can be making claims that their solar system is helping to green the grid, or that their solar panels have reduced their energy costs through the generation of the sale of RECs. But they can't be making any claim of using renewable energy or the associated claims on their scope 2 emissions. So they have to, since it would be considered null power, they can apply an average, the grid average emissions rate or grid residual mix to their scope 2 emissions. So we have a third scenario. In this case, company C has an on-site system, but did not keep the associated RECs from that on-site solar, but instead purchased wind RECs equal to 100% of its power needs through possibly a REC arbitrage. What sort of claims can this company make about their use and generation of renewable energy and their associated greenhouse gas emissions? This one gets a little trickier. Next. So because they had a solar system but are using wind RECs, they can't be saying that they're using solar power. But they can say that their solar system is helping to green the grid. They can't be making claims that their solar power is reducing their carbon footprint, because it's not. They've sold off the RECs. They can be making the claim that their solar panels are helping to reduce their energy costs and generation through the sale of RECs, but they can be making a zero emissions rate based on the replacement wind RECs. But they should be clear that they shouldn't be making any claim of it being a solar REC claim. Just a slight nuance there. Next scenario. As you can see, we're getting deeper and deeper into these nuanced scenarios. But in this case, University D signs a physical power purchase agreement to offtake the production of 10 megawatts of wind power and its associated RECs to a yet to be developed offsite project, huge project. 9 other institutions have similar 10 megawatt PPA agreements, and because of this power purchase agreement, the project is now being built. What sort of claims can the company make about their use and generation of renewable electricity and the associated greenhouse gas emissions? Next. Much like the first scenario, you can make the same claims that you're using solar power. You've helped develop new supplies because they were instrumental in getting this project built. You can apply a zero emissions rate conveyed by the RECs to your scope 2 emissions. And then finally, the last scenario. So in this scenario, Company E signs a 20-year physical PPA with a new offsite system, but per their contract agreement, the developer owns the RECs for the first 5 years, and the company will receive replacement nationally sourced wind RECs for those first 5 years. For the follow-on years, and this often happens due to tax issues, for the follow-on years from year 5 to year 20, the company will own those RECs from that project. What sort of claims can this company make about their use and generation of renewable energy and their greenhouse gas emissions? Next. The answer is really all of those answers. It just depends on the time and year and what's going on. So in the first 5 years, you can make claims of using that they're generating solar electricity, but they haven't kept the RECs, but they are using 100% replacement. They're using 100% renewable energy from wind power. For the follow-on part of the contract, or the last half or the last 2/3 of the contract, they can make additional claims based on the ownership of the RECs coming from that on-site or that off-site PPA that they're engaged with. As you can see, the more complicated the situation gets, the more complicated the claims get, but you try to be as transparent as possible whenever in making these environmental claims. And I think that goes through the scenarios, and now it's back to you, Noah.
Thanks, Chris. That was really great. So we have had a handful of questions come in, and I think we've got definitely a little chunk of time to go through those. So I'll queue them up, and then I'll let you and Eric take a stab at them. Start with one that deals with, I think it relates to the workshop. And this question is regarding solar energy claims. If a homeowner has a solar array on their house and it serves household load before any excess is sent onto the grid, can the homeowner fairly claim that they use solar energy to power their house without the use of RECs?
That does get a bit complicated. Probably the best way to say that you're using renewable energy is if you have storage of that renewable energy, because right now, for most of these home ownership scenarios, you aren't keeping the RECs, you're leasing your roof to a company, and they are keeping the RECs generated from that and are being sold into the market. So you really aren't using renewable energy unless there might be a bit that you're using as it's passing through your house on the way out. But the RECs that are generated from your home are being sold by those generally leasing companies who have leased your roof and are selling them out. And other people are making claims of that renewable energy that you've generated.
And I have another one. This one's intended specifically for Eric. How do you see the integration of distributed energy resources getting implemented into the grid affecting PPA structures?
Affecting PPA structures. Well, I think a lot of what we talk about, definitely around solar, is this concept of value deflation. And the moment when renewables get big enough and DERs get big enough that they begin to create their own weather. And in the early days, that wasn't really the case. You could kind of come online with a PPA that could just compete with, say, the wholesale rate. But now with a lot more, especially solar on the grid, you start to encounter these problems where your PPA rate, and there's a lot of high-profile, record-breaking PPA rates, are no longer really representative of the types of values that the DERs can bring to the grid. I'm not sure what that means for the future of PPA structures. I've heard concepts floated that maybe you'll see some bold developers looking at selling into the grid as a merchant operator. You've seen some of those abroad. And increasingly, not so much in the United States, but internationally, we've seen reverse auction structures rather than, say, traditional PPAs. So I think it's a very good question. The traditional PPA as we know it is always evolving and will certainly continue to do so.
No, this is Chris. Can you just move it to the next slide, please? Because there's some best practices that's good to highlight to folks. Yeah, great. As you ask questions. Thanks.
Gotcha. And actually, now that we're going back to the workshop, there's another question that came in about solar claims. Regarding community solar, if the RECs do not go to the subscriber, then who retains them?
Generally, the RECs in community solar projects are going to utilities, often by policy design. For example, in Colorado, a big community solar state, the utility retains the RECs to help them meet their RPS.
Okay, and I believe this one's geared towards Chris. And if you don't want to answer, you probably don't have to. It's about AB 1110. Someone's wondering if the EPA can weigh in on AB 1110, maybe give a brief description and what your perspective on this power content label regulation is having on the market.
Yeah, that's not my ballywick, so it would be difficult for me to speak on that matter.
Eric, do you have an opinion?
I would ditto on Chris's response.
Okay. And this isn't necessarily my specialty either. I mean, our director of policy at CRS is quite involved with this, more so than myself. And he's been involved in advocating for the continued use of RECs to substantiate renewable energy use. So this process, as I understand it, is still ongoing, and we're hoping that we can preserve the use of RECs to convey renewable energy use, and obviously that's something that this bill is potentially calling into question in California. So that's really all I can say from our end, but we are involved in trying to advocate for the continued use of RECs in this process. We had a question come in about residual mix and a little explanation of this. Eric, is that something you'd feel comfortable talking about?
What's the question?
Just what kind of the grid average emission rates or residual mix is and how that's calculated.
That might be better for Christopher. A lot of times the EPA is estimating that, but the residual mix is essentially an estimate of whatever the local generation sources are, typically regional, for a lot of the reasons that we talked about, that it's very difficult to track where electrons are flowing. But I don't know, Chris, if you know more about how you actually calculate that.
Yeah, there's a couple of databases that we use to track that. One is eGrid and one is Avert, and those are the ones that sort of track the municipal utility grid, and then we're able to calculate both the emissions rate depending on your location, as well as create a state and national average.
Okay, and we also had, let me see if I can pull another one up. We had a just general question about what scope 2 emissions are.
I can try that. So an easy way of thinking of this is the emissions associated with your organization's direct impact is scope 1. The emissions associated with the energy or the electricity generation is scope 2. The emissions associated with everything else, from supply chain to transportation to everything else, is scope 3. So those are the 3 scopes. And oftentimes, your scope 1 may be somebody else's scope 3, or your scope 2 is a utility scope 1. So it just depends on perspective, and it's just a way of categorizing ways of tracking greenhouse gas emissions and such.
All right, we had another question on the use of blockchain technology in the energy sector, specifically in regard to REC markets. Do either of you have an opinion on that?
Yeah, you need a blockchain question. We should have mentioned blockchain at some point. Yeah. And so blockchain gets tossed around a lot in REC conversations, particularly. There's REC tracking systems are set up. It's, in a way, RECs would be a nice testing ground for blockchain transactive energy markets. So I'm not sure that I have a strong opinion on yet, that other than that, it gets tossed around a lot in the green power space, and there are people that are looking into developing it, especially RMI is really we're involved.
Yeah, I mean, I can just talk a little bit about that as well. This blockchain is something that comes up in our office every single day, and in the context that's relevant to CRS, it's mostly in regard to REC tracking. And obviously it has a huge potential to automate some of the audit processes that are usually entailed in providing legitimacy in this market. I think it's possible, and everything's kind of in development right now. Everyone's kind of vying to develop, the technology that works best for the rec market. But it seems like potentially what we'll have is blockchain technology being layered into the existing tracking systems or something along those lines. But it's definitely something that has the potential to disrupt the way that these attributes are currently being tracked in the market. Obviously, it's also used for other things. I mean, it can be used for smart contracts and actually transacting electricity itself, and not just accounting for the environmental attributes. So there's a lot of potential. Eric mentioned RMI, and they have their Energy Web Foundation. There's a lot of other energy companies active in the retail space that are investigating, their own proprietary technology as well. And there's really just things popping up coming out of the woodwork. So it's really, really exciting thing to keep your eye on in the future. And I will look for maybe one or two more questions. Give me a second. We have a question about how green tariff prices differ from normal tariffs across the US.
We don't have a lot of information on the actual rate structures, but in general, the concept is the green tariff includes the RECs. So anytime that any REC, if you can think of any REC has a value. So whenever you're adding a REC into a purchase on top of what would otherwise be no power, you're going to have a premium. And the only question is if the actual deal is structured in a way that the savings offset the value of the REC. With green tariffs, my general sense is that the corporations are eating a premium for the first few years and then expecting longer term savings, because they're locking in a way that's similar to a PPA. So maybe they're locking in 2018 at a rate that's a bit higher than what they would otherwise pay, but they expect within 5 or 10 years for that to pay off.